Good morning, guys. Welcome to your phonics lesson for Monday. We are going to be going into a review on prefixes and suffixes today. Again, this is something that we've already done in the past, so I'm not going to dive too deep into the instruction of it because this is something that you guys should remember. So we're going to start by talking about prefixes. And before I go into examples and the definitions of the various prefixes, we're going to start by just looking at what are prefixes and what are some things we should know about prefixes, okay? So prefixes are when there are letters added at the beginning of a root word, okay? So for example, if we have our root word, the prefix will be something that's added right at the beginning, and it will always change the meaning of that root word, okay? If we were to take the prefix off of the root word, it would mean something completely different, okay? Now, we need to be aware, okay? Sometimes there are letters that are the same letters as a prefix at the beginning of just a word, okay? Now, the way to know if it's a prefix or not is to cover up what you think the prefix is and see if the root word, the rest of the word, makes sense by itself, makes sense on its own, okay? So for example, I have these three examples here. If we were to cover up what we think the prefix is, does the rest of the word make sense, okay? So we have uncle. That's our first one. And the prefix that we think we see is un, U-N. So if I cover that up, C-L-E, is that a root word? No, it's not. So uncle is a word that just happens to have those prefix letters at the beginning, but that's not a prefix, okay? So be careful with that. Same with the word under. So if I think that un is my prefix in this word, I'm going to cover it up. Now I'm left with D-E-R, der. I don't think that's a word that can stand by itself, so that's not a prefix, okay? And invent. So this one can be a little bit tricky. Now, we have to think, what does it mean to invent something? Well, to invent something means to create something new, okay? If we are to cover up what we think the prefix is, which is in, we're left with the word vent. Does vent have anything to do with inventing something? No, vent means to release something. I vent my feelings to you, or the fan is venting outside. Okay, so if we were to cover up in, it doesn't make sense to the original word, so this is not a prefix word. Okay, so that's our overview of prefixes, just things to keep in mind as we move through this lesson. All right, so now we're going to look at some common prefixes that we'll be dealing with in your assignment today and then your assessment on Friday. So definitely take notes on a piece of paper of what these prefixes are and what their meanings are, because this could be the answer to some questions on your assignments this week. So we're just going to run through this really quick. So we've got our prefixes in this light green and we've got their definitions in the dark green, okay? So we start with the prefix un. When un is added to the beginning of a root word, it means not or opposite. We've got re, which means again, dis, which is also not or opposite. So with these ones, you just have to figure out which one is the right one for the root word. We've got the prefix non, which means not, mis, which means wrongly, sub, which means under, pre, which means before, trans, which means across, inter, which means between, mid, which means middle, anti, which means against, uni, which means one, bi, which means two, tri, which means three, multi, which means many, and then we have this little cluster of prefixes down here, which are in, im, ear, and ill. And those all mean not. And we're going to give some examples of those once we are done talking about suffixes, okay? So pause the video and write these down. Really, it's super important that you guys understand the meaning of these prefixes so that when you go to your assignment, you are able to easily answer the questions based off of your notes. Okay, so pause it, write them down, take a screenshot, take a picture, do something, and then we'll move on to suffixes, okay? All right, so we have our suffixes here. Now, again, these are just things to keep in mind before we talk about the different suffixes we are going to work with this week. So suffixes are the opposite of a prefix. They're letters that are added to the end of a root word, okay? Now, adding a suffix can sometimes change the spelling of the base word, and these are the rules that are really important for you to understand as we move through talking about suffixes, okay? One of the rules is that you're going to have to double the consonant. So in words like run, when we're trying to add something to the end, we need to double that consonant. So runner, the ER tells us it's someone who does something. We have to double that consonant, and now we know it's somebody who runs. Okay? Running, same thing. The ing tells us it's happening over and over again, or it's ongoing in the present tense. And we have to double that consonant to say that we are currently running. The next rule to know with suffixes is changing the Y to I before adding your suffix. So happiness, the root word is happy, and we know that happy ends with a Y. We have to change that Y to I before we add the suffix ness. Okay? Same thing with earliest. So early is the root word and it ends with a Y. Before we can add our suffix, we have to change the Y to I. So now I wake up the earliest out of everybody. And the last rule to know about these suffixes is when you need to drop a silent E, okay? For example, we have the word making. We know that the root word make has a silent E at the end. We don't want to keep that there. We want to get rid of that E, and then we can add our suffix. Okay, so again, take a second to review this. Definitely write these rules down because they're going to be really important if you need to spell any of these words with a suffix. Okay, write it down. Then we'll look at some examples. All right, so we have common suffixes. These are the ones that we are going to be looking at the most this week. So I'll pull you guys closer just a little bit so that you can see it a little bit better. With these, we have a variety of endings that we can add to a base word. The first one is the S or the ES, and this shows that something is plural, meaning there's more than one. We've got the ED at the end, which shows that it's a past tense verb. We've got ING, which we just talked about, which shows that it's ongoing, present tense. LY means characteristic of, which means if I'm saying it's cloudy, which means if I'm saying that I'm moving slowly outside while I run, then it's showing how I am moving slowly, okay? Remember that the ly also usually shows adverbs, okay? Sorry. We've got ER and OR. So at the end of a root word, if it has an ER or OR, then that's showing the person that does. So a good example of this would be, I teach you guys, so I am a teacher, okay? It's got that ER at the end, so I am someone who teaches. Next up, we've got this cluster, and this cluster is the ION, TION, ATION, and ITION. We could also add SION into this cluster as well, but I didn't want too many. This is the act or process of doing something, okay? Able at the end means it can be done. Ness at the end is the state of. So if I say sadness, it's the state of being sad. Less means without. Meant is the action or process of something. ER and EST are comparative suffixes. So we're going to go over a couple of examples, but just remember that ER compares two things and EST compares more than two things. So just keep that in mind as well. And lastly, we've got full, which means full of. So I know we're breezing through prefixes and suffixes right now. Take a second, write these down. It is review, so we should be doing pretty good with understanding what they are and how to identify them. And again, you guys can create your own list right now, and as you go through the words on your assignments, you can cover up the prefix or cover up the suffix and see if that base word makes sense. Okay? So take a second, write these down. I'm going to scoot my laptop back again just a little bit, and then we're going to go over some examples of prefixes and suffixes used on actual words. Okay? So pause it. So here we have our examples, and I pushed you guys too far back. There we go. Here we have our examples. So sometimes a word can have both a prefix and a suffix attached to the root word. For example, we have the word unanswered. So this has a root word of answer. We have a suffix of ed, which means that it happened in the past. It's past tense. And then we have the prefix of un. And if you remember, un means not. So it was not answered. Okay, so in your assignment, it's going to ask you to write the definition of some of these words based off of their prefix or off of their suffix. If it has un, you just know that it's going to be not or opposite. If it's unplugged, it is not plugged in. Okay? To rebuild something means to build it again. To rewind something means to wind it again. Illegal means it is not legal. Imperfect means it is not perfect. So we know what the new definition is when we add a prefix to a word based off of the definitions of the prefixes that we had. Okay? Disagree means to not agree. Non-stick means it does not stick. Unicycle, one wheel. Bicycle, two wheels. Tricycle, three wheels. Okay, so these are just good examples of prefixes and suffixes being used on words. Understand that you guys can get the new definition of a word by looking at that prefix or looking at that suffix. Reference the notes that you guys took earlier on those different common suffixes and prefixes, and then you'll be able to write your new definition, okay? So if I asked you to write the definition of non-slip, all you would need to say is does not slip, okay? If I asked you to write the definition of preheat, you would just need to say heat before, okay? So go on to Edulastic and complete your assignments for today. Make sure you are referencing the videos, reference your notes, and let us know if you have any questions, okay?